What's up guys, this is Ben from RadTech, and today is the day we've been waiting for. This is the PC building series, and today we're building the PC. So here I am with all of my parts. I got my case, got my graphics card, I got my 4 sticks of RAM, my CPU, all my storage drives, my cooler, my motherboard, and my power supply. I'll be linking all of these products in the description below if you want to copy my build. If you do copy my build, tag me on Instagram so I can see who did it best. I'm ready to go, I hope you are too. Feel free to follow along and pause at any moment if you need to catch up. Feel free to also add some comments to this video if you have any questions or if I missed something. Now that we have everything, all you'll need is a screwdriver. I like this one from KLEIN tools. I'll be linking this in the description as well. This one has many different tips on it. You can also take the tips out to use for hexagon bolts, like we will with our power supply. But we'll be sticking to the Phillips head for the most part of this video. Without further ado, it's time to unbox all this. And here we are. We've got all my stuff, and it's time to go. In this room, I have a carpet floor, so I'm wearing shoes just to make sure that the rubber soles don't conduct any static electricity, which may end up hurting the hardware. So we're going to be starting with the motherboard. You're going to want to take it out of the case and out of the plastic and put it on top of the plastic bag. This is partly to protect the motherboard and to protect it from static electricity as well. So to start off, we got our CPU. It's going to be going in this little socket here. So there's a little arm that you're going to want to lift up, and you'll notice that there's a little plate that moves back and forth. This is what locks in the CPU once it's all the way down. On the top left of the socket, you'll notice a little triangle. This corresponds with a little triangle on the CPU. You want to match up the triangle on the CPU with the triangle on the socket. This is because CPUs only have one certain way that they can go in. When putting your CPU into the socket, you want to be very careful because there's many pins, and one bent pin may mean that your computer does not work. So because of this, you don't want to be dropping it in, you want to place it down carefully. I've got my CPU matched up with the triangle, so now it's time to place it down. Now that it's in, all you have to do is pull down the bar and click it underneath the locking mechanism. You'll notice that if you try and pull on your CPU, it won't be coming out. Now we have our CPU installed. Next up is our RAM, and they'll be going up on the top right. On each DIMM, there's a locking mechanism on each end. You'll want to pop these both open before putting in your RAM. If you look carefully on the motherboard, these DIMMs will be numbered. I have number 1 all the way on the right, then number 3, then number 2, then number 4. If you're only putting in 2 sticks of RAM, you'll want to put it in numbers 1 and 2. So in my case, I'd be putting it in the far right and then the second to the left, if I had 2. But I'm working with 4 sticks, so that doesn't matter for me. You'll notice on the RAM that there's a slot. This slot makes it fit in only one direction on this DIMM. All you have to do is push it down into the DIMM, make sure it's aligned properly, push it down, and then both of the locking mechanisms will lock down, making it nice and snug. Do this for all the RAM that you have. So now that our RAM is installed, next we'll be moving to the M.2 slots. You can see that my motherboard has 2 spots for the M.2, along with a heatsink for each one. On this motherboard, I have 2 slots, and I've already installed one, so now it's on to the second one. I've taken out the screw that holds down the heatsink. All I have to do is take this out. On the bottom of the heatsink, there's a sticky pad, and I've already taken off the protective layer from it. All I have to do is take my M.2 drive, stick it into the slot, and it clicks in like that. You may be wondering why it sticks up like this, and that's totally normal. All you have to do is hold it down, take your heatsink, stick in the non-screw side, and then carefully put it down. Then you take your screw and screw that in nice and tight. There you go, our M.2 drive is all installed. Next up, my water cooler has a back plate that goes onto the back right behind the CPU. So now it's time to screw that in. All I do is take it and have the screw holes come up from the bottom. Then I take these double-sided screws. With screws like this, there should only be one way that it can screw in. Do that for all 4. You may notice that it sits a little loose, and that's totally normal. And this is everything we have to do on the motherboard on its own. Next up, we'll be moving to the case. Most cases normally come with their standoffs already installed, but just in case they don't, you should always make sure that the case you have has them. These are used to separate the case from the back of the motherboard so that the circuits on the back of the motherboard don't get short-circuited from the metal of the case. Some cases may have fans pre-installed that you have to take out. This case, for example, came with a fan on the back, and I have to take that out to be able to fit my motherboard in. So I've already done that, and now I'm good to take my motherboard and place it into the case. And there we go. Now it's all nice and snug in. Now it's time to screw the motherboard into those standoffs. Screwing in and taking out your motherboard from your case is always best to do laying down, just in case something falls loose, because you don't want your motherboard to fall out and land on something important. So now I've got all my screws in. You should also take note that not every screw hole on the motherboard may have an installed standoff on the case. You don't want to throw screws into empty holes that may fall out later on. So now with my motherboard snug and in place, I can put this fan back on. Some of you enthusiasts may notice that there's a part missing from my case. That would be this, which is used for cable management and making the cables look nice. This usually goes right here, but I had to take it out to make my cooler fit nice and close to this wall. This case comes with a little bracket that holds onto your radiator. All you have to do is unscrew it, and it pops out. From there, I screw on the radiator onto this. This is something you want to be pretty careful with, just because there's a water tube, so you want to make sure that you don't break that, so that you don't get any leaks in your system. Alright, now that I've got all those screws nice and tight, time to drop this guy in. I want to make sure I don't get all these cables stuck. I want to keep them in the front here. Drop this in, and I carefully place the pump side down as I screw this part in. I feel like some of you guys are looking at this and thinking that I could put the radiator on the other side of the bracket, and that way I can put the cable management bracket back in. And you'd be right. But with the limited amount of airflow that I can get with this front panel, I like to keep that as wide open as possible because of the 3D rendering that I do while I'm rendering all my 3D animations. These fans are running quite hard, and this radiator gets quite warm, so I like to leave this front area nice and open to have lots of airflow. Now that the radiator's in, time to put this pump in. Here I have the 4 thumb bolts that'll screw onto the plate that we put in before. But first, what we need to do is add some thermal paste. You don't want to get this stuff on your hands or your clothes because it's quite hard to get rid of, so it's best to be careful with this tube. There's a lot of controversy online about how much to put on, so use your judgment and try and do the best you can. You don't really have to smooth it around too much because the pressure of your cooler pushing down on the CPU will spread it out nicely already. Some coolers come with a plastic film over the copper plate, so you'll want to make sure that you remove that. Next up, all it takes is dropping it down and lining up the holes with the screws that we put in before. Just like screwing a wheel onto your car, you don't want to go too hard on the first one. You want to put all 4 on loosely and then go back and tighten them up. So I put my first one on the bottom, second one on the opposite corner. Sometimes you may need to lift up the bottom just to push that plate up so that you can get a little bit more real estate in that screw. Now that we've got our cooler in, it's time for the GPU. Putting the GPU in is pretty much the easiest thing to do. All you have to do is take it and line it up with the PCIe slot that you're going to be putting it in, and then match up the I/O slots, and then take out the covers in the back. Once you're done that, you want to click open the lock, line it up, and then click it in place. You'll notice that it's still a little bit loose, so you'll want to screw it into the back. Now it fits nice and snug, and we're good to go. Cases like mine may have another little shield here, so you can drop this shield down and screw that back in place. And this is pretty much the bulk of the work. Next up, we're going to go to our PSU, or power source. For this, we have to access the back and the other side. While it may seem correct to put the fan facing up, you'll actually want to take the fan and put it upside down, facing down. That's because the fan sucks air up and then pushes it out the back. Now we have our cables, we keep them out of their way, make sure the fan is pointing down, and then we put it right up to the back there. This is one feature I like about this screwdriver, is that I can take this out, and then I have the hexagon, which fits perfectly in with the screws for the back of the power source. The benefit of using the hex bit over the Phillips bit is that it slips less, so that means that the screws stay intact longer. Some cases like this may include a compartment for the hard drives. This one goes right down in the bottom, but first you have to take this out and then put your hard drive in. So I got my hard drive screwed in, so all I have to do is flip this case up. And here I want to make sure that the connections face the back so I can access them through this hole. Alright, now this is in place and that's not going anywhere, so I'm going to flip it back up. And last but not least, I have my SSD. Some cases come with SSD trays like this one that pop into a place like the back or the side. These are quite easy to install. You just place your SSD in it, flip it upside down, and screw in the bottom. Once it's all screwed in, all you have to do is pop it into place. For this one specifically, there's no screws. All it is on this one is little plastic nubs that fit into a hole, and there's a clamp on the tray that fits it into place. So you line up the holes, clamp it in, and now it's snug in there. You'll probably want to keep the connections facing down because that way the cables will be a little bit more out of the way. So now everything's installed, all we have to do is wire everything up. So if you look at the back of your computer, you'll notice that there's a lot of different connections. So I'll help you go through those. There's probably a few that come from the case itself. These are for the USB ports, the headphone and mic jacks, the power button, and any LEDs that are on the case. Here I have 3 cables and they all plug into the bottom of my motherboard, so I take them all, send them through my case, and I'll get to those in a bit. Next up, we have these 2 cables from my power source. These are the ones that are always connected to the hybrid power sources. The smaller one powers the CPU directly, and the biggest one powers the motherboard itself. The one for the CPU is all the way on the top left, so I should be able to fit it through the back and then up into the top of the case. I have a little hole on the top here, so I'll be able to feed this snugly through, push it all the way in, and then run my cable down the back nicely. This bigger connection goes right beside the RAM on the right side of the motherboard. So this one will stay down here and go through the side of the case right here. The rest of your cables from your power source are for your hard drives and SSDs and for your GPU. As I mentioned in the storage drive video, the little L shape on the bottom is for the drives. The connection is the same for both SSDs and hard drives, so you don't have to worry about which one is which. Here I have my SSD plugged in, and then I go to my other one for my hard drive. You'll notice that I have all the other connections taped off with electrical tape. This is because I don't want any debris or anything else to fall into this connection, which may cause a power failure or something else that I have no idea what it is. So I like to lean on the safer side. So here I plug in the power into my hard drive, and then I take all the rest and I just shove it in. All that's left here is the GPU. The GPU power connection is all the way at the front of the GPU, the opposite side of where the connection is. So I'm going to take this and I'm going to shove it through the top. Next up, I'm going to take the second cable and plug my SSD in. This data cable follows the last one through the hole. And now we can start on the front. Now that we have all the cables we need passed through the front, it's time to start plugging things in. First, we'll start with this guy. This is from the case and this is for your USB ports. This guy goes right down here and you can see that it says USB 3. There's a little tab on the front to make sure that it only goes in one way. Next we have these two guys with one pin that's filled in. These for me will be going into this connection here with all the different colors. The second one has a different pin that's filled in, so this one will be going on the other side of that connection. Make sure to wiggle them tight to make sure that they're all the way plugged in. Now that those in the bottom are plugged in, we can go to the GPU. You'll notice that there's two pins that are loose. This is because some older parts didn't need the extra 2, they only needed the 6. So for now, all you have to do is hug them nice and tight, pinch them with your fingers to make them all lined up, and then plug them all into the GPU. Clip them in, and that's good to go. Next up, we have our motherboard power. You'll notice that some pins have rounded bottoms. This is so that there's only one way to plug them in and that you don't reverse it. That's nice and snug, and next we have our CPU power. Same goes for that with the rounded pins, and this goes way at the top left of the motherboard. On the motherboard, beside the CPU power port, you may have noticed 4 little pins that are labeled system fan. I'm going to take one of the cables that we didn't pass through at the start, one of these little ones, because this goes to this fan in the back. Since this is nice and close to that connection, I'm going to take this, send it through the back at the top, and then this pin will be going into that connection. Sometimes you'll notice a wire like this with 3 pins in it, going into a connection with 4. There's a little rail system on one side of the connection, and a plastic pin on the motherboard that slides into these rails. This is so that it only plugs into those 3 certain pins. I'm actually going to have to take my CPU power connection out for this one because I have big hands and they don't fit into that small space well. And there we go. I'm going to edit this to make that go a lot quicker, but don't feel bad if that takes a long time because there's a lot of things going on in that little corner and not much space for your fingers to go. So that took me quite a while. Finally, I'm going to pull all the cables back out from the back, and we'll be cleaning those up in a bit. Next we have our cables from our cooler. You'll notice some pins that say CPU fan. This is where you'll want to plug in the cooler. Next we have our cooler LED. This plugs in down here where it says LED CPU. Just like that. Now we're all done. Now we have our 2 SATA ports, and these guys both go right under the GPU on the far right side of the motherboard. Next we have the other fan, which is on top of the case, and we'll be sending it through the same hole that we sent the first one through. Pull that up nice and tight, and this one will be going right above all the PCIe slots to the left of the CPU. Now is a good time to pull all the cables back into the back where we'll be keeping them clean later on. Each fan has 2 cables, one for the LEDs and one for the fan. The fan cable can plug into this connection, which has a sticky back which I'll be sticking right around here. Now all I have to do is the fan's LEDs. Here I have a cable that converts an LED signal from one connection to a different one. This is because not all motherboards have the same LED connections. So I'm going to plug this one into the closest LED connection that I can. From here I have two different connections and each fan will plug into one of them. So now that everything's plugged in, before I go ahead and clean all the cables up, I want to make sure that everything runs properly. So here I have an IEC cable which plugs into the back of the power source. You'll notice that there's parts of my motherboard and my fans light up. This is a good sign so far. Now I'm going to make sure there's no cables that are loose hanging in front of a fan that might get caught. Now that everything seems pretty secure, I'm going to press the power button. All my fans are running properly, so I'm going to say it's good to go. I'm going to power it off from the top, wait for everything to go down, turn the power off the PSU, unplug the power cable, and then hold the power button for another 5 seconds just to discharge any extra power that may be still in the motherboard. Alright, so I've gone ahead and cleaned up all the wires inside of my computer. Most of what I've done is pull the wires out through the back and then just tie them up a little bit. Now that everything is built and plugged in, I've gone ahead and plugged in my keyboard and my monitor. This is so we can access the BIOS, which is how we will be installing the operating system. My next video will be talking about booting your computer up for the first time, so be sure you subscribe and click the bell icon so you don't miss that video. In the meantime, there's one last thing I have to do to this computer to have it all finished off. My motherboard comes with this antenna. This plugs into my motherboard to connect me to my Wi-Fi. These two gold-plated connectors plug into the back of the motherboard. Once you've plugged those in, all you have to do is just put this on your computer anywhere nearby. It has a magnetic bottom, so you can put it on top and not have to worry about it falling off. Now that we're all finished off, it's time to turn it on. I have my power source plugged into an IEC cable plugged into the wall. All I have to do is flip the switch on the back. Some of my LED fans will light up. Hold the power button and turn it on. My fans are running smoothly and that's a good sign. Next, on this monitor, we'll be seeing the BIOS appear. When you see the logo of your motherboard pop up, you'll want to have your keyboard ready to start spamming. Different motherboards have different keys that you'll be pressing. My motherboard, for example, uses the home or the delete keys. When I see my logo, all I have to do is start pressing this button, and then I get into the BIOS. And this is where we will be booting. Now that we have all this set up, it's time to close off our computer. To make things extra neat, a lot of cases have little areas where you can latch down all of your cables. This can come in the form of plastic tracks that route your cables in a certain way, or little hooks on the case where you can zip tie your cables to. In this stage, having a mix of twist ties and zip ties comes in handy. Along the back here, I only have this one main power cable running through, so I'm going to use a small twist tie to tighten it down. Right here I have a little hook that I can attach this to, and then I'll wrap it around the cable and twist it off. As you go through this stage, to make things extra neat on the front, you should always pull on the cables from the back just to make sure that there's no extra cables that are hanging on the front. All the extra cable that you pull from the front can be neatly stored away in the bottom of the case. This is a loop of cables that I found in the front that I was able to send to the back. Both ends of this cable come from the same area, so there's nowhere that I can route it. But I can neatly store it away in this track here, and then I'll zip tie this down. When it comes to cable management, there's no real right or wrong way, as this is all up to the aesthetics that you desire. If you wanted to, you could put no effort into making all the cables look nice. On the other hand, you could go crazy making it look super neat and super tidy on the back and the front. I clearly have a lot more work to be done, but I'll save you guys some time and finish the video here. Thanks for watching. Make sure to like this video, follow me on Instagram, and feel free to tag me in any photos of the PCs that you've been making with the help of this series. Feel free to leave a comment on this video if you have any questions about what I've talked about today or in the previous videos, if you have any suggestions on future videos, or let me know how well these videos helped you. Thanks for watching. Peace.